The frontier was so new. So many people wanted to learn and hear all about it. It was up for anybody's interpretation of how the Wild West was. Miners, outlaws, lawmen, the indigenous. Some folks wanted to experience it, but didn't want to experience actually going out to the frontier. Buffalo Bill's Wild West frontier shows, it was an interpretation of that. Anything from early rodeo, acting and theater, songs, sharpshooters. But another thing that was unheard of at the time was women shooting a rifle. And that's where Annie stepped in. Annie Oakley was born Phoebe Ann Mosey on August 13 of 1860. Lived not too far, about 2 miles northwest of Woodland, which is now Willowdale in Darke County, Ohio. It's a pretty rural county along the state lines with the state of Indiana. Her birthplace is approximately 5 miles east of the North Star. There is a stone-mounted plaque in the vicinity of the site, which was placed by the Annie Oakley Committee in 1981, about 121 years after her birth. Annie's parents were Quakers of English descent from Blair County, Pennsylvania. Susan Wise, her mother, was born in 1830, and Jacob Mosey was born in 1799. In 1848, moved to a rented farm, which later they did purchase and have a mortgage in Patterson Township, Darke County, Ohio. Annie was born 1860, of the sixth of Jacob's and Susan's 9 children, and fifth of 7 surviving. Annie's father had died in 1866, and she was actually put in the Darke County Infirmary along with her sister Ellen. Annie had begun trapping before the age of 7, shooting guns and hunting by 8 to support her siblings and her widowed mother. She had sold hunted game to the locals in Greenville, such as shopkeepers Charles G. Anthony and Katzenberger, who shipped it out to the hotels in Cincinnati and other cities around the area. She also sold the game to the restaurants and hotels in northern Ohio. Her skill paid off the mortgage for her mother's farm when she was 15. In 1870, she was bound out to a local family to help care for their infant son on the false promise of 50 cents a week, which is equivalent to about $11, $12 nowadays, and an education. The couple had originally wanted someone who could pump water and cook and who was bigger. She spent 2 years in near slavery to them, enduring mental and physical abuse. One time the wife put her out in the freezing cold without shoes as a punishment because she'd fallen asleep over some darn. Annie would refer to them as wolves. Annie Oakley was known for using a variety of rifles and shotguns, including custom-made and factory-made models. She favored shotguns like the Lancaster. Charles Lancaster, the British gunmaker, built a custom shotgun for Annie Oakley perfectly to fit her physique and enable her to excel in clay pigeon shooting. Had his gunsmiths customly make that double-barreled shotgun, hammerless. It was smooth bore, 12 gauge, made to her measurements, including shoulder and arm length, weighed approximately 6 pounds. And it was used mostly in her Wild West show performances, particularly during her appearance in the 1889 Paris Exposition. This legendary shotgun sold at the Morphy auctions for $258,000 on September 5th of 2023. There was the Bauman and Butler Shooting Act, which was performed in Cincinnati. It was a traveling show with marksmen and former dog trainer Frankie Butler, who was an Irish immigrant, who placed a $100 bet per side, equivalent to $2,900 in today's money, with Cincinnati hotel owner Jack Frost, that Butler could be any local fancy shooter. The hotelier arranged a shooting match between Butler and the 15-year-old Annie, saying the last opponent Butler expected was a 5-foot-tall 15-year-old girl named Annie. After missing on the 25th shot, Butler lost the match and the bet. Other people accounts say that Butler hit on his last shot, but the bird fell dead about 2 feet beyond the boundary line. He soon began courting Annie, and they married. They never had children, however. And according to modern-day accounts with the Cincinnati Enquirer, it's possible that the shooting match took place somewhere in 1881 and not 1875. The unknown frontier, Wild West shows became incredibly popular, especially amongst the people who would never travel out to the West. Popularity grew for these from about 1870 to 1920. They'd begin with theatrical stage productions. They evolved into open-air shows that depicted romanticized cowboys, plains, Indians, Army Scouts, outlaws, wild animals. While some of the storylines and characters were based on historical events, others were fictional or sensationalized. One of the first would be Texas Jack Omohundro, whom had recruited former scout Buffalo Bill Cody. Their original playwrights, the Scouts of the Prairie, debuted in Chicago. Eventually, in 1874, Cody founded the Buffalo Bill Combination, in which he performed for part of the year while scouting on the prairies the rest of the year. Wild Bill Hickok had actually joined the group to headline a new play called Scouts of the Plains. However, Hickok wasn't too fond of acting, and he was released from the group after he shot out some light shining on him. Texas Jack parted with Cody in 1877 and formed his own troupe. And in 1883, Cody founded the Buffalo Bills Wild West, an outdoor attraction that toured annually. And in 1883, Cody founded the Buffalo Bills Wild West, an outdoor attraction that toured annually. The show contained a lot of action, including wild animals, trick performances, theatrical reenactments, and all sorts of characters from the frontier were incorporated into the show's program. Shooting exhibitions were also in the lineup, with extensive shooting displays and trick shots. Rodeo events involving rough and dangerous activities performed by the cowboys with different animals also featured. It was the first prototypical Wild West show, lasting until 1915, and featured theatrical reenactments of battles, characteristics, western scenes, and even hunts. Buffalo Bill's mission was to turn his real-life adventures into a first-person outdoor western show. The newly wedded Annie Oakley and her new husband Frank Butler, both pro marksmen in shooting exhibitions, became one of the main attractions of the Buffalo Bills Wild West show for 16 years. Annie Oakley was all the rage at the time. Star of the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. People would flock all around to see Annie Oakley. It was unheard of, a woman shooting a rifle. But also a woman being the best sharpshooter in the United States at the time. Watch the woman light her husband's match, and then shoot his cigarette out. Annie Oakley had become so famous that firearm manufacturers, to advertise their guns, would give her a variety of them. Stevens Little Sure Shot, Ithaca, Marlin, HR, Lancaster shotguns, Parker Brothers shotguns. Annie was the face for all of these, and actually acquired quite a bit of wealth through endorsements with these contracts and companies. Sitting Bull was the political and spiritual leader of the Sioux Warriors, who destroyed General George Armstrong Custer's forces in the famous battle at Little Bighorn. Years later, he joined Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. He was held prisoner at the Standing Rock Reservation in the Dakota Territory. Sitting Bull was allowed to travel with the permission of the reservation's Indian agent. In one of those trips in 1884, he had met Annie Oakley, whose marksmanship was so impressive that the Sioux Warrior offered $65 for a photograph of them together. The next year, Sitting Bull actually joined Buffalo Bill Cody Wild West show. His duties were limited. Sitting Bull rode in the show's opening procession, and he was well compensated, earning $50 a week, plus the money he made from selling autographs. He was treated kindly by Oakley, who said the Sioux Warrior made a great friend of me. Sitting Bull also met the new President Grover Cleveland, but life on the road was sometimes unpleasant. When Sitting Bull was denied permission to return to the Wild West in 1886, the show went on without him. Among the firearms that Annie Oakley used, most of them, either pistol or rifle, were by Stevens for up-close type of trick shots, whether it be shooting cards, cigarettes, matches, etc. She would use the Stevens tip-up break barrel rifle. The model that Annie used most, however, which was her favorite .22 rifle, was the model 1891 Marlin lever-action rifle. Annie didn't use pump-action rifles when she would do her exhibition shooting. She did use some pistols and, of course, double-barrel shotguns along the way with her. However, she did have other Marlins, and just the 1891. She also had the 93 and the 97, which were both presented to her by the Marlin Company, as was the custom of that era, and it was a great way for them to get their products out and advertised. Marlin did not make ammunition. Peters Cartridge Company did not make guns, so Marlin provided Peters exhibition shooters with Marlin rifles to use and get exposure to the public, which is why Annie would use mostly their ammunition. Oakley had promoted the service of women in combat operations in the United States Armed Forces. She had wrote letters to President McKinley on April 5th, 1898, offering the government service of a company of 50 lady sharpshooters would provide their own arms and ammunition should they go to war with Spain. The war did occur. However, Theodore Roosevelt named the cavalry the Rough Riders after Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders of the World, where Oakley was a major star. That same year, Oakley was badly injured in a train accident, recovered after temporary paralysis and 5 spinal operations. She left the show in 1902 and began a less taxing career doing stage plays. Oakley played the role of Nancy Berry, who used a rifle, pistol, and a rope to outsmart a group of outlaws. Throughout her career, it's believed Oakley taught more than 15,000 women how to use a gun. Oakley believed strongly that it was crucial women to learn how to use a gun. It is not only a form of physical and mental exercise, but also defend themselves. Famously said, "I'd like to see every woman know how to handle guns as naturally as they know how to handle babies." Oakley continued to set records into her 60s and also engaged in extensive philanthropy for women's rights and other causes, including the support of young women she knew. She embarked on a comeback and intended to star in feature-length silent films. She hit 100 clay targets in a row from 16 yards at the age of 62 at a shooting contest in Pinehurst, North Carolina in 1922. Also in 22, her and her husband were in a car crash, which forced Oakley to wear a steel brace on her right leg. She eventually went back into shooting again. However, her recovery wasn't so great and her health declined. And in 1925, she had died from pernicious anemia at the age of 66. On November 3rd of 1926. She was cremated and her ashes were buried at Brock Cemetery near Greenville. According to B. Hogan, Butler, her husband, was distraught by her death and he had stopped eating and died 18 days later in Michigan. One rumor claims Oakley's ashes were placed in one of the other trophies and placed with Butler's body in his coffin prior to burial. Both body and ashes were interred in the cemetery on Thanksgiving Day of November 25th, 1926.